Hi all. I am thankful to all listeners for appreciation and encouragement for the metaphoric videos. Your constructive comments, likes and subscriptions of my channel keeps me in high morale to improve and provide paraphernalia that is more creative. I have many more videos in pipeline, covering many stories of Sir Kenneth Anderson and Sir Jim Corbett, which may give you an insight of the challenges I have been going through in deciding which one to toil on first. Based on my particular liking in this video, I am going to narrate The Lakkavalli Man-Eater, written by Sir Kenneth Anderson. If you were to visit the township of Tari Kerry, in the western parts of Mysore state, you would find two motorable roads, open to you. On these, at a distance of not more than 4 or 5 miles, from the town itself. If you had the time to stop and listen, you would hear many stories, from the villages about the depredations of tigers. The first of these roads, leads roughly southwestwards from Tari Kerry, passing in a curve through the village of Lingadhalli, to the south of the high horseshoe range of mountains known as the Baba Buddans, crossing its lower slopes at the hamlet of Santavari, and continuing to the town of Chikmagala, about 20 miles away. The second road leads northwestwards, passing the eastern and northeastern slopes of those same mountains, before curving through two hamlets, named Lakkavalli and Umbalbile, to the town of Bhadravati, which itself is barely 10 miles from Tari Kerry, by a third and more direct road. The first and second roads, in this way circumvent the southern and eastern slopes of the Baba Budan range, and the tigers that cross the hump of the mountains, from the deep valley to the west and north, ringed in by these mountains, find themselves either in the vicinity of the hamlet of Santavari on the southern road, or in the area known as the Lalbagh, west of the eastern road. These should be kept well in mind. The hamlet of Santavari, and the area known as the Lalbagh. For it was at these places, and in the area between them, that the adventure with the tiger, about which you are now going to hear, took place. Santavari, at the height of 4,500 feet above sea level, is a rocky, wild and thickly forested region, while the Lalbagh, perhaps 30 to 35 miles away as the crow flies, although more than 1,000 feet lower and far less rocky, is correspondingly more thickly forested. I happened to be visiting my old friend Dick Bird, who was the postmaster at Santavari, and in private life one of the most famous tiger hunters in the district, having shot all his tigers with a Pont 12-bore shotgun, spurning the use of a rifle. "Jock," he asked me, "have you heard about the tiger that has turned up around Kemmangundi?" I should explain that Kemmangundi is about halfway between Santavari and the Lalbagh area, and that Dick always calls me Jock. For I have lived in so many places, and hunted in so many forests, and in so many different climates, with different fauna and flora, and have done so many different things, that I have become a sort of Jekyll and Hyde, with a variety of names and nicknames. Very old friends call me Jock, Scotchy, or Scotch, while those met more recently address me as Andy, Kenneth, Ken, and KDS. At school they called me Snake Charmer, because of my fondness for producing these reptiles from inside my shirt and releasing them in such places as Sunday school, the school chapel, the classroom, the dining and study halls, and in cinemas and other congested spots. This was long ago, of course, and I have not been addressed as Snake Charmer for some years, having dropped the habit of releasing the reptiles in public. Most embarrassing of all, young Dudwalla, my son's friend, insists upon calling me Dot. Personally, I do not see the least resemblance or slightest connection between myself and any small mark with a pen or sharp point, which the dictionary gives as the meaning of Dot. So, because of the variety of names by which I am addressed, and being somewhat absent-minded, I occasionally become confused, and look around for the party addressed. But to return to Dick's question. No, I replied, I haven't been in the area for quite a while. I used to operate a lot in Salem district, as you know, but have had to extend my wanderings to the Nilgiris and into Andhra state. Tigers are still plentiful there. Well, there are quite a few still, Dick continued. But ordinary ones. You know, cattle lifters. Snatch and grab beasts that haunt the cattle herds. The animal I have mentioned appears to be a little different, though. He then went on to explain that reports from herdsmen stated a very large tiger had recently formed the habit of attacking their herds, even while they were still on the roads and being driven to the grazing grounds. Before the very eyes, it would seize and kill the fattest and choicest cow, and carry her off, slung over its shoulders. This had happened several times, and but a few miles from Santavari itself, on the road I have told you about that led from Tarikeri to Chikmagala. The same sort of thing was reported to have taken place on another, smaller road, leading to a hillock named Kemangundi, which branched off the main Tarikeri-Chikmagala road, shortly after passing through the village of Lingadhalli. Dick went on to relate that 2 or 3 herdsmen had attempted to defend their charges by trying to frighten the tiger into relinquishing the carcass of the victim, as it was carrying it away, by shouting and throwing stones. They had soon desisted, however, when this tiger, instead of leaving the carcass and running away, had dropped the cow, and charged in their direction, whereupon they had fled. Investigations later showed that the tiger had returned after chasing the herdsman away, picked up the cow, and made off with it. This tiger seemed to favor carrying its victim, slewing across its shoulders, rather than holding it by the neck or throat, and dragging it along the ground. We discussed this point, and agreed that the indications were that either the tiger was an exceptionally bold animal, perhaps an old male, or that it intended carrying the carcass a long way before devouring it, perhaps to some distant cave, or other lair, should it happen to be a tigress with cubs. The animal was wise enough to realize that dragging its kill for a long distance would entail getting it caught in bushes and thorns. It therefore preferred to lift the carcass bodily. If only I would get some leave. In this damned department, Dick complained, I would bag it by hook or crook. But to get even 2 or 3 days, casual leave entails a hell of a fuss. A replacement for me has to be called from Tarikeri or Chikmagala, and the superintendent acts like mad. That's what comes of being a postmaster. My visit over, I returned to Bangalore and forgot all about the tiger. In any case, I was not interested in cattle lifters. Some months passed until, one morning, I happened to go to the district magistrate's court in Bangalore to purchase some government stamp paper, of which I was in need, when I met an Indian gentleman at the stamp vendor's booth. He was grumbling, because the particular denomination of stamp paper he wanted was not available, nor were any smaller denominations that would add up to the total amount required. I purchased the paper I needed, which was of a much higher denomination and was available. What name? The vendor asked me, preparing to enter this on the back of the stamp paper, as required by rules. Kenneth Anderson, I replied slowly, spelling out the Anderson, so that he could write it correctly. The Indian gentleman with us was staring hard at me. After entering my name and receiving payment, the vendor handed me the stamp paper, and the gentleman spoke. Excuse me, sir, he asked, but are you the Mr. Anderson who shoots tigers? Well, I suppose so, I answered with a smile. At least I don't know of any other Anderson who has the bad habit. Then, as an afterthought I added, perhaps you mean my son. My name is Venkata Subbarao, the man said. I am the assistant chief engineer working on the Lakkavalli Dam project, near Tarikeri. You see, when the vendor asked your name, and you replied that it was Anderson, I pricked up my ears. I have heard of you shooting tigers, all over the place. You must really come to Lakkavalli, sir. Come as my guest. I have large quarters and can put you up conveniently. You will be quite comfortable, and I will make all the needful arrangement for you, to shoot the man-eater. What man-eater? I asked in surprise. Haven't you heard? He answered, evidently taken aback. Why, it came out in the newspaper 3 days ago. But come along and have a coffee with me, and I'll tell you all about it. There is a restaurant, known as Tiffin Room, within a stone's throw of the magistrate's court, and there Venkata Subbarao and I went. Over not one, but several cups of coffee, he related the following story. A large tiger had appeared on the road from Tarikeri, that led past the eastern slopes of the Baba Budan mountain range, and passed through Lakkavalli, before going on in a circle to Bhadravati. It had begun by killing cattle belonging to the many herds that were taken to graze in the jungle bordering the roadside. The tiger was reputed to carry off its victims across its back, and if any of the herdsmen dared to interfere, this animal chased them off with loud growls. Invariably it would disappear in a western direction, into the jungles of the Lal Bagh. Time passed. Nothing happened to any herdsman, but the tiger continued to exact its toll. Naturally, the herdsman grew more angry with the tiger, and became correspondingly bolder. Equally naturally, the tiger grew more angry with them, and grew bolder itself. The day dawned, when the anger of both sides came to a head. The tiger was moving off, with a particularly fat cow, across its shoulders when a herdsman, more plucky than any of his companions, rushed after it, and hurled his stave. As was its custom, the tiger dropped the body of the victim, and roaring and growling horribly, charged the man, no doubt expecting him to bolt as so many others had done before. But this man did not run away. Maybe he was braver than the others. Maybe he was stricken stiff with fear. Maybe, having cast his staff away, he thought it useless to run anyhow. Of course, not being present himself, Venkata Subbarao did not know what really happened. What he did know was that the tiger killed and ate the herdsman, before walking off again with its fat victim, the cow. Word got around and the herdsman, in the Lakkavalli area, stopped interfering with the tiger. When it attacked a herd, the men in charge promptly fled, and the tiger, politely, did not bother to chase them anymore. But other herdsmen, farther off, had not heard of what had transpired near Lakkavalli. They continued their old tactics, of trying to drive the tiger off, when it attacked their animals. The tiger, having come now to realize how helpless his human victim at Lakkavalli had proved to be, and emboldened by that experience, killed 2 herdsmen one after the other at Kemmangundi, and one other not very far from Santaveri. These 3 victims, it was reported to have completely devoured, and, most significant feature of all, after eating them it had spurned the carcasses of the cattle it had killed. The tiger had returned to Lakkavalli after that. Once again, the scene was set for tragedy. A herd of cattle was being taken out to graze by 2 men, a middle-aged man and his son of 15 years. They were standing together, watching their charges, when the boy saw the head of a large tiger, observing them from behind a rise in the ground. He drew his father's attention to it. Both had turned to flee, leaving their animals to the tender mercies of the tiger, when that beast, instead of attacking the cattle, had come after them. The lad, being young and fleeter of foot, was running ahead when the father saw the tiger bound past him, overhaul the boy and pounce upon him. In heedless panic, the older man had swerved to the right, and continued his headlong flight. When he reached the village, he collapsed in a faint, and it was a long time before he could tell what had happened. The villagers went to Venkata Subbarao's quarters, to beg his assistance. My new friend, however, did not own a gun, and so could not help them at that moment. He closely questioned the father, and got from him all the details, just as he related them to me. A runner was dispatched to Tari Kerry, some 11 miles away, for help. Meanwhile the herd of cattle came rushing back to the village. It was intact. Not one of them had been harmed. The next morning, a mixed posse of policemen and forest guards, 9 in number and armed with lathers, arrived together with 2 constables, with rifles, and a police sub-inspector, carrying a revolver. Thus a dozen men, led by the father, went to the spot where the tiger had attacked. The body of the boy was not to be seen, and everybody returned. Thereafter the problem of obtaining labor for working on the dam became insurmountable. Those who lived in huts in the village refused to go out, while many went back to Tari Kerry. Others, and quite a large number of them, had made a practice of cycling every morning, the 11 miles from Tari Kerry to work at the dam, returning the same distance in the evening. These refused to undertake the journey anymore. And those people who brought supplies of rice, grain, bread and vegetables from Tari Kerry to the technical staff, working on the dam, declined to travel on that dreadful road. So not only had work on the dam practically ceased, but the senior staff stationed at Lakkavalli were being starved out. My new acquaintance had taken advantage of the inactivity to come to Bangalore on short leave, where we had met at the stamp vendor's counter. He earnestly begged me to return with him to Lakkavalli, to try to rid the village of the menace that had beset it. I had work to attend to, but yielded to my companion's pressing request, and said I would come for 5 or 6 days only. I could not possibly stay longer. Venkat, by which name I shall refer to him hereafter, was very pleased. I do not think he realized that it is practically impossible to locate a man-eater in 5 days. It was arranged that he should return to the hotel he was occupying, gather the bedding and the few other things he had brought with him, and be at my house by 3 p.m. the same day. We would then travel in my car to Lakkavalli. I hastened home to gather my own equipment, which is always kept ready, along with some tinned provisions, when I had another surprise. The postman brought a short letter from Dick Bird. Dear Jock, hurry up and come. Be here by tomorrow. That tiger I told you about has turned man-eater and swallowed quite a few cattle men. Yesterday, it carried off my postman, while he was taking the mail bag, from here to Hosur village, 3 miles away. I had no time to ask for leave, so reported sick, and looked for the remains of the postman, to sit up over them. We searched all day, and only found the poor chap's cap and slippers. And, of course, the mail bag. Couldn't the bloody tiger have eaten that? Time's up, and I have to return to duty tomorrow. Now, no excuses, man. I'm keeping lunch for you the day after tomorrow, that is, the day after you receive this letter, provided the tiger doesn't eat the reserve postman, who carries the mail today with this letter. Poor beggar, he's in a blue funk and I can't blame him. Your pal, Dick. Dick was surprised when he had 2 guests for dinner that very night. Venkat and I had made the trip in record time. We chatted till a late hour, but this did not get us anywhere. I remembered that, beginning the following morning, I had exactly 5 days in which to locate the man-eater and shoot it. Dick Bird could not leave his post. Venkat, with all the willingness he evinced, knew nothing about shooting and had no weapon anyway. There was no trace of the postman's body, and it was not worth searching for it, as only bones would be left. Venkat said that he had to be back at the dam by the following noon, so we decided to motor to his place that very night. By road, it was about 50 miles away, although much nearer as the crow flies. We downed a final rum, and said goodbye to Dick well after midnight. I instructed Venkat how to operate the spotlight, which with the headlights of the car, enabled us to search the jungle as we drove along. We were still about 15 miles from Tari Kerry, at a place named Bagavad Kat, where a stream passes under the road, by a small bridge with low parapets. Dark palms thickly fringed the road, both to right and left of us, with heavy undergrowth, and tiger grass growing beneath the palms. It was there that we came upon a marvelous spectacle. Standing to one side, just beyond the parapet, and evidently about to cross the road, was a magnificent tiger. It turned its head towards the car as the beams from the headlights, as well as the spotlight, caught it, and the reflection from its great orbs was brilliantly white-red, like 2 great stars shining by the wayside. By white-red, I mean more of white with a tinge of red. This is how I differentiate a tiger's eyes at night from those of a panther, which are smaller, closer together, and red-white in color. That is, more of red and less of white. We could see the tiger's striped coat, indeed its whole form, clearly in our bright lights. I stopped the car. Both tigers and panthers, when a bright light falls upon them, often try to take cover by sinking to the ground, although they continue to stare back at the light, thus giving themselves away. This is just what our tiger did. It sank low and then started crawling forwards on its belly, seeking to hide behind the parapet of the bridge. Venkat was beside himself with excitement. He trembled violently and the spotlight wavered.
Shoot! Shoot! Shoot!
He hissed, louder and louder. The tiger heard him. It scrambled forward the few remaining feet, till the parapet hid it. Then it leapt down into the stream, passed under the bridge, and we heard it growl, as it disappeared to our left in the long grass, and undergrowth beneath the border of date palms. I could almost see tears in Venkat's eyes, as he looked at me reproachfully. His lips trembled. For a moment I thought he was going to cry. I explained to him at some length, that all tigers are not man-eaters, that we were outside the man-eaters' limit of beat, at the moment, and that Bangalore Cat was, and had always been, a well-known spot where tigers crossed the road, or passed under the bridge. From the low range of hillocks on the one side to the low range of hillocks on the other, and that the animal we had seen, was undoubtedly a perfectly harmless to humans, an innocent beast. Moreover, it was against rules to shoot tigers on the roadside with the aid of a spotlight, and unsporting besides. I am not at all sure to this day, whether Venkat was convinced by my arguments or considered me a fool. He certainly maintained an embarrassing silence, till we reached our destination, his bungalow, at about 2 a.m. There he brightened up a bit. This happened when the watchman of the place informed him that the man-eater had carried away one of the few remaining coolies working on the dam, when the man was returning to the village from work shortly after 5 p.m. the previous evening. As a result, the coolies had told the watchman to inform his master when he returned that they would not come to work next day. Even if my arguments at the bridge at Bangalore Cat had not excused me in Venkat's eyes for not shooting the tiger we had seen there, he now had to be convinced that the animal that had crossed the road there could not have been the man-eater. Venkat offered me food, but I declined and said we should snatch some sleep till 5 o'clock, in order to be ready to start our operations at 6 a.m. He thereupon conducted me to a little room with a comfortable bed, and in 5 minutes I was asleep. Dawn had broken when we set forth, together with the watchman and 3 coolies, for the place where the tiger had claimed its latest prey. It appeared that these same 3 coolies had been with the victim when the tiger had taken him. The 4 men had been walking along the high bund or wall of the dam, which was still under the process of construction. They had reached the end of it, and were descending the steep slope, where the sluice gate was to be built, with the intention of climbing up the other side, when the man-eater struck. There was a piercing scream, and on looking around, the 4th man was not to be seen by his mates. A moment later, they caught sight of him, held securely by the throat in the jaws of a tiger, which bounded up the slope they had just come down. The beast crossed the top of the bund, and disappeared from view. They delayed not a moment, but fled to report the news at the village. Next they went to the engineer's bungalow. Nobody had attempted a rescue of any kind. We searched the cutting, which was to form the sluice gate, and there the tragedy of the evening before, in all its gruesome details, was made clear to us. The man-eater had not been lying in wait in the cuttings, as we had surmised. It had in fact been some distance away, when it had seen the men and had deliberately followed them. The soft earth showed pug marks, where the tiger had clambered up the bund, bounded along the top, and then sprung upon the man, who had been the last in line, as he was descending the slope of the cutting. The poor fellow had probably died, soon after emitting his loud scream. There were no blood marks at the spot where he had been attacked, indicating the tiger had not delayed in picking up its victim, and making off with him. We found the pug marks left by the killer, as it was making off after crossing the top of the bund. Halfway down the steep slope it had skidded, and the piled up earth showed the deep furrows left by its 4 feet, when it had dug them into the ground to stop its slide. At this juncture, it must have released his hold upon the dead man's throat, for when the tiger picked him up again, it left a trail of blood all the way down the rest of the incline, and into the jungle beyond. But for the blood trail it would have been impossible for us to follow the spoor, for the undergrowth, due to recent rain, was dense. But the vivid green of the carpet of weeds contrasted sharply with the bright red of the blood drops, which showed up clearly before us, for some distance ahead. The tiger had carried its victim westwards, and for a long distance. It had crossed the main road at a sharp curve, about half a mile beyond Lakkavalli village, and before the road had begun to circle back towards Umbalbile and Badravati. The animal was obviously making for the Lalbagh forest block, and I began to suspect that it must be living in some cave in this area. A few minutes later we crossed the forest department's fire line, and were now officially inside the Lalbagh forest block. Our quarry had not stopped for a moment, and it was becoming difficult to follow its trail. The blood in the body of its victim had coagulated and ceased to flow, so that the drops that had fallen were scarce and small. Our progress was consequently slow through having to search for them at long intervals, and I feared that very soon the trail would die out. That was exactly what happened 10 or 15 minutes later. No further blood drops could we find, nor was it possible to see the pug marks of the man-eater. 12 hours had elapsed since it had passed that way, and the freshening effect of the night breezes, together with the dew that had fallen, had again raised the bent stems of weeds, grass and undergrowth that had been trodden upon or brushed aside by the tiger and the body of its victim in passing. With stems and leaves standing stiffly erect, the weeds and undergrowth effectively hid from us any indication whatever as to the direction which the tiger and the victim had taken. The trail was dead. Venkat and my other companions were bitterly disappointed. So was I. However, one piece of information had been gained from our work that morning. It was clear that the tiger lived in some cave, or haunt within the Lalbagh area, as I had suspected from the beginning, and considering the distance it had already brought its victim, his hideout could not be very far from the place where the trail had died out. I made inquiries as to the existence of a cave, but none of the villagers appeared to know about one. As soon as we got back to the village, I asked for the local forest guard. He would know the topography of the jungle within its jurisdiction. To my chagrin, I was told that the guard had gone to departmental headquarters at Taraikea, and would return only in the morning. No time was to be lost, so I bundled Venkat into the car beside me, and made for Taraikea without further delay. The bee that had got into my bonnet regarding the existence of a cave, or other hiding place would have to be swatted before I was satisfied. In half an hour we were at the district forest office, where we found not only the guard we were seeking but also his immediate superior, the forest ranger, and the divisional chief, the district officer, as well. With these people around us, we related how we had followed and lost the trail of the man-eater in the Lalbagh jungle. Could they tell us if there was a cave, or any other place of hiding in this block in which the tiger could have made its home? The DFO looked at the ranger, and the ranger at his guard. Then the guard looked back again, and so back and forth. There does not appear to be any cave in the area, Mr. Anderson, the DFO announced at length. The bee that had flown into my bonnet was dying an ignoble death. My theory was shattered. The guard, standing on one bare foot, scratched his shin with the toe of the other. I don't suppose the devil could be sheltering in the old Manaswara temple. Could he, Swami? He asked shamefacedly, addressing his immediate superior, the ranger. The Manaswara temple, ejaculated the ranger, thoughtfully. The Manaswara temple, the Manaswara temple, the DFO exploded exultantly. Then, to the guard who was hanging his head in disgrace. You fool. Why didn't you say that before? That's it, that's where he is. The old Manaswara temple. The DFO pranced about in his excitement. When emotions had died down, I was informed that an ancient temple, almost in ruins, stood a short distance within the border of the Lalbagh block. From the directions given by the guard, we must have been very near it when we had lost the trail that morning. The inner room, or sanctuary of the temple, was said to have partly caved in, but sufficient room was left for the tiger to live in, the guard thought. Back we went to Lakkavalli, the DFO, the ranger and the guard following in government jeep. They said they wanted to be in at the kill, although they promised me they would remain in the village, and not hamper me while the actual killing was taking place. It was now past lunch time, but with expectation at fever heat I decided to forego the meal and set out with the forest guard on foot for the ruins of the old temple. We passed the spot where we had lost the blood trail and had gone another mile or more when there was a sudden dip in the ground. The center of this little bowl or depression was an island of tangled undergrowth and bushes, and peeping through the varied foliage I could see the gray ruins of a small temple. Instructing my companion to climb one of the taller trees and remain at the top, a suggestion that he did not delay a moment in executing, I picked my way on tiptoe towards the ruins, taking advantage of every intervening bush to cover my advance. The hot sun poured down on the scene and I was in no hurry. In my excitement I discovered I had forgotten to ask the guard the direction the temple faced. This was important, if I hoped to take the man-eater by surprise. It would never do for me to be watching the rear of the temple while the tiger slipped out in front, circled around under cover of the undergrowth and attacked me from behind. Eventually, on closer approach, I could make out the opening that led to the temple sanctuary. It faced a little to my right and was partially blocked by debris. I was lucky. All I had to do now was creep up beside this opening, take cover, draw the man-eater out, and shoot it. This is what I proceeded to do. Edging forwards, I reached the corner of the square that formed the outside of the temple. This struck me as being a very suitable place in which to hide and ambush my quarry. I would be safe from attack when the tiger rushed out. Naturally, it would charge straight forward and not think of looking for me to its right or left. But there was a snag. If I hid behind one corner of the building, what was to prevent the tiger hiding behind the other corner at the back of me and pouncing upon me from the rear? It might not be in the temple at that moment, for all I knew. Perhaps it was watching me, from the cover of some bush while it was searching for it. I decided to creep up to within a couple of feet of the temple entrance and flatten myself against the wall. At least that would prevent me from being attacked from behind, while I was peeping around the corner in front. This, I did and was in position at last. Now it was a matter of drawing the tiger out. I had to avoid frightening it, and I should not anger it. It had to do itself out of curiosity, so I moaned faintly, imitating the call of a tiger far away. Nothing happened. Perhaps the tiger had not heard me, although I could scarcely credit that. I moaned again. And still nothing happened. I moaned a third time, and much louder. That distant tiger had made a remarkably fast approach. Yet nothing transpired, and I concluded that the tiger was not in the temple. I peeped around the corner very carefully, then I grew bolder and entered the broken opening, stooping double. A damp, moldering smell greeted me. The dust at the entrance showed no pug marks. Nor was there any trace of human remains. Not only was no tiger here, but no tiger had been here for months. Clearly, the Munswara temple was not the man-eater's hiding place. We were so disappointed, that the huge lunch my friend Venkat had prepared for himself, and me was sufficient to feed the DFO and the ranger also. Moreover, a little was left over, sufficient to give the forest guard a snack. Sitting on the plinth of the veranda of Venkat's bungalow smoking, a short while later, I chafed at the delay, while my friends continued to talk over events. Time meant everything to me, but nothing to them. It is the one thing in India that has never been rationed, and never will be. In the afternoon sunlight, a Lambadi herdsman grazed his buffaloes outside. With the man-eater about, it was far too dangerous for him to take them into the forest, while the sparse grass in the compound of the engineer's quarters offered a meager substitute. Attracted by the sight and smell of the assorted fumes from my pipe, Venkat's cigar and the cigarettes smoked by our two friends of the forest department, this individual became sufficiently emboldened to approach us and beg for a cigarette. The DFO threw him one and we forgot his existence, after seeing him move off to the rear of the bungalow, where we heard him and the forest guard talking to each other. A few minutes later, the guard approached. He was excited, but also hesitated to interrupt the conversation of his exalted superiors. "Well," muttered the guard with great diffidence, "I pray your honor not to get angry, but the outcast Lambadi tells me, there is an overhanging ridge of rock, a mile beyond the Munswara temple, under which there is sufficient space for a tiger to shelter. In fact, he says he saw one sunning itself on top of the rock one evening, when he was returning with his buffaloes, and before the man-eater came amongst us. Of course, he ran away and his animals followed. He says he had not been there again. We summoned the Lambadi, without delay, and closely questioned him. His reply was exactly what the forest guard had just told us. The only new piece of information he offered was that he felt certain that the tiger he had seen and the man-eater were one and the same animal, bearing in mind the fact that the tiger had not turned man-eater at that time. Within a few minutes, I was on my way again, the forest guard accompanying me rather reluctantly this time. But the Lambadi was in better spirits. It was 4:30 when we passed the temple, and close upon 5 before the Lambadi pointed out to me, about 200 yards ahead, a slight rise in the ground above which peeped a sloping rock. He told me that, although we could not see it from where we stood, owing to the intervening jungle, when I came close enough I would find that the rock made a low overhanging cave, the entrance to which was not more than 2 feet in height. This, he thought, had been caused by the rush of rainwater during the monsoons, for the cave was not a very deep one. On his previous visit, he had been at almost the same spot on which we were now standing and had noticed the tiger, lying at full length and sunning itself on the top of the rock. He had run away as fast as he could. Once again, I told my companions to climb trees and to remain there till my return, and for the second time that day, I crept forward on tiptoe as cautiously as possible. This time my advance lay through fairly thick jungle, and not through open country like that, which formed the depression in which the old Munswara temple molded. I looked to right and left and behind, to guard against flank and rear attacks. There was an oppressive silence, and I glanced momentarily downwards, at each pace that I made. On no account must I step on a leaf that might rustle or a twig that might crackle. Now and then, despite all my precautions, some part of my body brushed against a bush, and made a faint rubbing sound. I said to myself, I must not do that again, the tiger will hear me. I was now very near the rock, but the undergrowth in front still hid the ground level opening mentioned by the Lombardi. I halted for a few minutes. Maybe I could hear the tiger if I strained my ears. I did so, but I heard absolutely nothing. A few steps more, I said to myself, and I will be able to see. I looked down. No leaf, or twig, no loose stone in front. It was safe for me to take another step forwards. I took that step, but I overlooked an insignificant little shrub to my right. That shrub had thorns, and the thorns did the trick. They rasped audibly against my trousers, held for a moment, and then let go with another rasp. Before I could guess whether the man-eater had heard me, it had in fact done so. Instinct warned it that this was no bird, no hare or other small creature that was approaching just out of sight. It knew full well that no living thing that could fly, walk or creep would dare to come so close to its dreadful presence. Therefore, this must be an enemy, and moreover, an enemy that was stalking it, the tiger, no doubt to kill it in turn. Its reflexes gave it this message and there was no delay. The tiger charged its shattering roars off, rending the silence. The bushes before me parted, and its head and body catapulted through them, before it caught sight of me. It halted for a moment prior to making the final spring. Perhaps it never expected to find a miserable human being, confronting it instead of running away. Head and paws at ground level, hindquarters and tail sticking up, the tiger looked a bit ridiculous. I fired twice into its head. Then I leaped quickly aside, for one must never forget to spring aside after firing at a tiger at close quarters, as the odds are 99 to 1 that it will rush straight forward, even if it must die the next instant. A dying tiger can in fact do you an awful lot of harm. The man-eater did as I expected, and I shot it twice more behind the shoulder. As it twitched and then began to stiffen, I saw that it was quite an old animal, past the age from hunting game. The bones of the coolie for whose body we had been searching were strewn about the entrance to the shallow cave. They had been gnawed clean. Red ants were devouring what small strands of flesh adhered to them still. The three of us returned in darkness, unafraid this time. There was another feast at the bungalow, and it gave me indigestion. Dreams of tigers rushing out of temples troubled me till the early hours. Then came a farewell to Venkat and my friends of the forest department. I was at Santavery by 9 in the morning. Dick offered me lunch, but I declined. My stomach was still rumbling, in uncomfortable protest as I swallowed a quick rum. By 4, I was home having accomplished my mission, well within time.
The end.